Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas. Welcome to Vyas, a voice of the community. This Sunday, we have a few important stories waiting for you. I will begin with a conversation with Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. His take on President's handling of COVID-19 crisis, as well as his response to Black Lives Matter movement. We'll also have activist Suman Raghunathan talking to us about systematic racism, police brutality, and anti-blackness in New York City. Dr. Kanchan Koya has a new cookbook, Spice Baby, and Ancient Spices. We'll have a conversation about that book in today's show, and there'll be a very special report by Aditi Lamba from Times Square, where many activists gathered for Black Lives Matter movement. We'll have activist Lyia talking to us about systematic racism against people of color. And we'll conclude today's Vision of Asia Voice of the Community with our weekly segment, this week with Padma Shri Dr. Sudhir Parikh. So all this coming up right after these short messages. Stay with us. You're watching Vision of Asia, Voice of Community, and we begin today's program with this special story from my conversation with Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. He feels that people are not understanding the approach of President Trump in the right spirit. Lot of criticism is politically motivated, are the views of Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. How he perceives the role of President Trump, let us hear from him.
Now we have a situation here where, at least in my mind, there's no doubt that there could be foreign entities sending divisive messages over the internet in an effort to divide the American people. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that there is a socialist agenda here in this country. We do have domestic and foreign enemies who are going to take advantage of this terrible situation.
When you object to socialist agenda, what is the specific feature that you perceive which is being propagated by Democratic Party or group of people who want to bring that socialist agenda on America?
To sum it up, my objection is the total control over the population. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And the socialists, they rule by the philosophy and ideology of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. My wife, for example, was raised in the Soviet Union. She was not raised under stars and stripes. She was raised under a red flag, a hammer, and a sickle. And she shared with me that living there under a socialist communist government, remember that was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, was terrible. You couldn't pray when you wanted to. Bibles were banned. The government sent you to school. For instance, in America, the socialists are telling our young people they will pay for their education. Well, they did that in the Soviet Union. But what the American socialists are not telling our young people is that they will take the educational courses they want them to take. And if they don't measure up, then they're going to be sent off to some job site. That's how socialism works. Government control over the lives of the people. And our founding fathers protected us from that via the Constitution that we have that gives everyone liberties and individual rights. Under God, by the way. Keep in mind that socialist pretty much starts with atheism, socialism, and then communism. So this is what we are concerned about, but we're going to fight this and we're going to do what Ronald Reagan did to the communists, send them to the ash bin of history.
So, talking about the functioning of our system, the idea that the majority of the members of Minneapolis City Council brought this Sunday of disbanding the city's police department. Having been a part of the police department yourself, how do you see that? And like I with very, very minimum understanding of the way system functions, I felt that you are depriving people of the cover or the protection that they have perceived as well as real by the presence of police department. So this idea itself is shocking. Is shocking to me. How can you conceive of a place to function properly, and you are just looking at one instance of uh, unreasonable as well as inhuman behavior of one police officer, but you are not taking into account the need of all the citizens who definitely need police protection. How are we going extreme here also again in terms of the proposal of the city council members?
This is yet another attempt by socialists, and I will qualify what I just said. To begin with, in America, we have a unique structure regarding law enforcement. We do not have a national police force. Socialists would love to have a national police force because then the government, one central power, has total control over law enforcement. Now, you're absolutely right with regard to the dangers of disbanding police departments. Who's going to suffer the most? The minorities, where there's high crime rates, where people are begging, literally begging for help. So instead of the Democrat socialists beefing up our police departments, they want to disband them. And I have no idea how they expect to enforce the laws and to protect people other than institute a national type police force. And that is something that is unacceptable in this country. We must keep in mind that the very people that they are claiming that they want to protect, which is our minorities who are suffering the most as a result of the Democrat socialist policies, are the ones who will suffer the greatest when these police departments are disbanded. Just this yesterday, as I understand it, thousands upon thousands of police officers across America are retiring and resigning. So they may not have to worry about defunding of police departments because there won't be any police departments left to defund. So that's something that has to be stopped because it is a very dangerous road that we're going down.
And now we have Suman Raghunathan. She's a well-known social activist, has given her powerful voice to many important social issues, and she talked to us about systematic racism, police brutality, and anti-blackness in New York City. Here are some excerpts from her conversation with Aditi Lamba.
My question to you in that would be, when you're looking at everything that's happening right now, Suman, and we're talking about the need for change, we're talking about a lot of cases that have just literally come out in the front, all saying something about police brutality. What have you felt about the president's response to this case, as well as how the White House administration is handling this? Do you think they are lacking perhaps, or do you think they're doing their job right?
I continue to be disappointed at the response of the president as well as the White House with respect to the uprisings and the ways that the president as well as his supporters in the White House have continued to fan the flames of violence. When you have a sitting president who references the words of a brutal police chief from the 1970s who vowed, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, you have an individual who is not working to calm down a powder keg of a situation across the country. You have someone who is choosing explicitly to pit residents against each other, which is not a course of action or words that will do anything to help defuse the high emotions and sentiments that are coming across the country. What is clear to me is that this administration, both via its actions, its statements, as well as its policies, does not care at all about ending police brutality, about ending systemic racism, or really about the lives that have been lost. When you have the current president indicating that a peaceful protester who was 75 years old in Buffalo, New York, pushed himself to in turn sustain a critical injury at the hands of police, I see yet another incident of blaming the victim of a tragic, violent incident. And I know that our nation deserves better, and that our whole set of residents across the country and really the world also deserves better.
You know, Suman, in the South Asian community, there is a sense of anti-Blackness, and apparently there is a lack of understanding of their own history of being a model minority. I think this is a good part in the interview for us to have a little discussion on that and your comments on that. How prevalent is this issue, and how important it is for us to right now discuss that there is anti-Blackness issue in the community, in which we have to educate and raise awareness so that, you know, we can understand that this issue just doesn't impact Black lives, it impacts all lives, all brown and Black communities.
I think this is a moment of deep reflection and a real opportunity for South Asians to be able to really understand, even from a historical perspective, the ways that South Asians have been pitted against very explicitly Black individuals and communities. I think it's important also for us to understand that we in our own community often hold very deep-seated feelings of anti-Blackness, and are often very quick to distance ourselves from Black individuals and from Black communities, and that continues to play into the rules of an explicitly white supremacist agenda. White supremacists want South Asians to believe that we are slightly better than Black folks, but they will never consider us their equals. And the level of violence that has been aimed against South Asians and Blacks is not equal. The level of violence and the murders of Black individuals in this country does not so greatly exceeds the level of violence that has been engineered against South Asians. And yet at the same time, we do have instances where we have an understanding of how anti-Blackness manifests in violence against ourselves. We have, the incident a few years ago in Alabama, where an elderly South Asian man who was visiting from India was seen as Black by white local police officers, was not able to make himself understood to them, was brutalized by them, and in turn ended up paralyzed. So I think we need to have more introspection and wake-up calls in our own communities about our own sentiments and ideas around anti-Blackness, and how we need to disrupt those ideas and truly actually take a stand, not just for our lives, but actually for Black lives. When India was on the precipice of its independence struggle, Black leaders from the US went to South Africa and then to India to build solidarity and to meet with Gandhi. And we need to have that reciprocity actually continue now, for us to have an even greater to really truly show up for the protection of Black lives across this country. Because, as my friend Linda Sarsour and so many others say, we will only be free once our Black brothers and sisters are free. And I truly believe that. And I think the events of the last 2 months have only shown to reinforce that.
Welcome back. You're watching Vision of Asia, Voice of the Community on ITV Gold. And this program comes to you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 8 p.m. And every week we have a special Vision of Asia edition on Sunday at 11 a.m. We appreciate your continued support for our programming. Requesting you to stay with us. We'll be right back after these short messages. While we have many concerns surrounding us, the importance of good food is never out of focus. And Dr. Kanchan Koya has written a new cookbook to help us all, which is Spice Baby, and how ancient spices are relevant for us. She talked to Aditi Lamba. Here are some excerpts from that conversation.
So let's talk about the book a little bit more here, Dr. Koya, because I feel like it's so important to discuss what you're talking about here. We're talking about ancient spices. There's a lot of Indian heritage and culture involved in it. And I love that your recipes also sort of reflect that. But you're talking about 15 key spices and its benefits. Could you reflect on, what some of these spices are? And also, why are these the key spices for everyone's health and well-being?
Yeah, so the book Spice Baby decided to do a scientific deep dive into 15 spices. And I picked those 15 spices not because I think the other spices are not important, but because I wanted to give people a starting point. And I really wanted to talk very, very directly to people who didn't grow up with spices. So, of course, Indians have grown up with spices. They may not fully understand, though, what the benefits of those spices are. They may have heard, things here and there around Ayurvedic benefits. And that's amazing. It's a great starting point. But I wanted to go deep from a scientific perspective. Mm-hmm. And so the 15 spices that I chose, I believe, are spices that are very, very adaptable to cooking in the modern kitchen. Whether you're Indian, whether you're an Indian American, whether you're from any part of the world. So I tried to lay out the benefits of the spices as the beginning of the book, and then really give people 100 different recipes where they can use these spices. Some of the recipes are Indian. There's always an Indian influence in a lot of my cooking.
Right.
Some of them are just ways in which you can spice up your kind of everyday basics, like oatmeal, pancakes, cookies, banana bread, popcorn, like your smoothies, because not everybody's eating Indian food 3 times a day, right? Even Indians may not be. Like, we all like variety. So I tried to create kind of a global canvas of recipes using these 15 spices that I think are very, very easy to use in the modern kitchen.
Is it to normalize perhaps Indian food and also like these Indian spices? Are you trying to create a target market, which is basically everybody, not just South Asians?
Yeah, definitely. I think I wanted to demystify spices is what the way I really thought about it. I think they have this mystical kind of aura. People tend to associate them with ethnic food, and people find them a little bit scary if they're not used to cooking in an ethnic way kind of all the time. So I wanted to demystify them so that globally people can embrace them on a day-to-day basis. And yes, I wanted to make Indian food a little bit more approachable, healthier, because sometimes there's that connotation of like the heavy, butter chicken or saag paneer or whatever the common dishes that people think of as Indian food, right? I wanted to make it seem brighter, lighter, fresher, and more in line with a healthy lifestyle.
You often talk about the fact that the reason you started Spice Baby was, again, there were a lot of misconceptions around spices and you grew up around them because you are Indian, and so you were really exposed to it and you saw the health benefits. What are some of these common myths or misconceptions about spices which sort of, hinder people from trying it?
Oh yeah, the most common misconception is that spices are spicy. So you'll hear non-Indians usually say, oh, I like spices, but I'm scared of them because I don't like spicy food. And so that was my first myth that I had to bust, which is really outside of the chili pepper family and the black pepper family. Most spices are aromatic, fragrant, wonderfully nuanced, and not really spicy. Think of cardamom, cinnamon, clove, cumin, coriander, paprika, on and on and on, right? They're not really spicy, they're just flavorful. So that was the first myth. Yeah, so the second most common misconception that I encounter is that people think that to enjoy spices on a regular basis and their health benefits and flavor benefits, they have to cook Indian food, or they have to cook a curry or some kind of ethnic dish. And I wanted to make the spices more approachable no matter your culinary preference. So that's the second one. And then the third one was that you can't give children spices. So when I started Spice Baby, it was all about, trying to educate parents to raise more adventurous eaters. And people would say, oh, but I can't give my baby spices. Like, that's so weird. And I'm like, why not? Your kid can have cinnamon and sweet potato and cardamom and pear. So Yeah, just kind of making spices more mainstream and allowing people to embrace them on a regular basis in their kitchen for better health is really what I'm passionate about.
So then my next question has to be, Dr. Koya, what are these health benefits? I know like we cannot go into a lot of the spices right now, but in general, when we're looking at adding these spices or, we're in a quarantine life right now, I think it's a great time to work on your wellness and eating clean and better. What are some of these health benefits we can focus on and perhaps some of the spices that go with it?
Yeah, so there are a lot of health benefits that have been studied. And like you said, it would be impossible to cover all of them in this interview. But I like to take, if I was going to take sort of a bird's eye view of the spice world and really the research that's gone into studying spices, I would say some of the best studied and understood benefits are around management of inflammation. And I think that's actually an important topic because as we look at, the coronavirus pandemic and COVID-19 and how it manifests in some people as a very, very severe disease with severe complications, we're learning that the severe complications have to do with the body's inflammatory response that has kind of run amok. Like it's an out of balance inflammatory response. And when you look at spices, many spices emerge as very powerful anti-inflammatory agents. So you do want some inflammation because inflammation is your body's defense. But when that inflammation doesn't calm down or it just keeps going, that's when you get damage to the lungs, to other parts of the body. So when you can incorporate foods like, for example, the top spices that come out in studies as anti-inflammatory powerhouses would be, no surprise, turmeric is a big one, the cayenne chili pepper, paprika family, black pepper, sumac, which I think Indians are less familiar with. It's a Middle Eastern spice that is kind of lemony and tangy, but it's really wonderful on hummus and salads. Also very powerful at fighting inflammation. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, on and on. So cumin, coriander, all of these spices are really going to help you manage and keep inflammation in check. So they're great to incorporate. And then the second thing I would say is when you're thinking about immune health and you're thinking about your immune system, you have to think about how intricately tied that is to your gut health, to digestion. In ancient Ayurveda, it was believed that all diseases begin in the gut. And now we are realizing modern science is showing that the integrity of your gut microbiome, how healthy your digestion is so intertwined with your immune system. 70% of your immune system resides in your gut. So spices that help your gut, your digestion. People know fennel seeds, cumin, coriander. These are amazing for gut health. Cardamom is a beautiful one, So thinking about ways in which to add these on a regular basis. Sometimes it's worth incorporating them into a concentrated tea, like a very ancient Ayurvedic tea is called CCF tea or cumin, coriander, fennel tea. Very, very good for gut health. So really thinking about your body as this entire kind of system that needs support, whether it's inflammation, gut health, and then of course we can talk about spices for cancer and spices that help mood and spices that prevent, oxidative damage. But that's the way I like to think of spices in the context of the current kind of health crisis.
There have been many movements supporting Black Lives Matter. And in that connection, there was a vibrant and passionate gathering at Times Square to support Black Lives Matter movement. Our own Aditi Lamba was there to cover, and here is a special report for ITV Gold.
Here at the Black Lives Matter protest happening here in New York City. Join us while we see thousands march for George Floyd and many others against police brutality and against systemic racism. I'm Aditi Lamba bringing you fresh updates here from New York City.
to the people. Let's get it.
Well, the momentum here is exciting. As the footage will show, Times Square has been shut down. NYPD and Mayor de Blasio knew that we were rallying, and this was such an important message to Black people and all marginalized people in America, and they tried to suppress that. What we are releasing today is an agenda. We are calling this meeting today a blueprint. And in this agenda, what we'll be talking about is, of course, 50A, police reform. We'll be talking about police unions. We'll be talking about education. We'll be talking about reparations, which is very important for descendants of slaves, education and housing injustice. So all the things that are currently affecting Black people that we are not going to overcome unless we have legislation, that's the blueprint that we'll be laying out today. And for any of you guys who missed it, you can go to my website, ShavonnaNewsomForCongress.com, or you can go to Black Lives Matter Greater New York's website, where we have laid out the plan.
The country is outraged. There have been so many memorials that have happened. I'd like for you to give a message out to George Floyd's family, but also all the ones that are grieving today, with everyone put together thinking that this has happened to thousands of Black people for so many years. A message out to those families.
This is a revolution, and I thank every single person for their sacrifice. I view George Floyd, I send my condolences to his family, but he's a martyr. It was his unfortunate death that galvanized the world. We have Black Lives Matter movements happening in Australia, happening in Tel Aviv, happening around the country, around the world. So, Mr. Floyd, thank you for your sacrifice, because now Black people will really get true justice and true liberation. And to the people who couldn't make it out here today, what I would ask you, if you are in the United States, call your governor, call your local officials, and put the pressure on them, because we need the demands and the legislation and policy that we're doing today. We need that implemented into law, and without applying pressure, that will not happen.
Yes. That is none other than Shavonna Newsom, everyone. She is running for Congress.
Yes, in the South Bronx. Go out and vote, June 23rd.
June 23rd, primary.
I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. It's a shame, but 60 years later, here we are yet again. After we thought we had gotten through Jim Crow, after we thought we had gotten through segregated schools, after we thought we had gotten through voter suppression and unequal housing, here we are yet again 60 years later, sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know, someone reached out to me this week and asked, Rev, how long are you guys going to be out there marching? And my answer was simple. We're going to keep on marching until we overthrow evil in high places. We're going to keep on marching until everyone has a right to health care. We're going to keep on marching until they recognize our basic humanity. We're going to keep on marching until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness an ever-flowing stream.
We don't stand just for ourselves. We stand for our ancestors. We stand for our community. Even when the work is hard, we are relentless. And she is the definition of what the future looks like with our youth activists on the ground.
So excited to be here today. I'm so inspired to see all of your beautiful faces out here today. This is like, I've never thought, and I haven't been around for a long time, but in my 19 years of living, I never thought that I'd see this many people rally across the world for Black liberation. So I am inspired.
Hey everyone, my name is Nicole Kiazolu. I'm 19 years old and I'm the president of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. We're out here talking strategy because we need policy that would save and change lives. And we know throughout the system that we live in, policy is one of the most effective ways to change these things. So I'm really, really inspired by all these people out here today, and I'm looking forward to what we get done.
And it's time to really enact some real changes. And so we have the attention of folks right now, and so we have to follow that up with real policies that change the system. And that's what we're hoping to continue the momentum towards.
Even if it's true, I'm not singing lullabies to the youth who's real in the field. Knowing it's safe. If they want you, they find you. A Peter Cloak case. You gotta have many occupations. Get out, get it, homie. No patience. Get up, no sitting down, no waiting. Do the right thing so you don't see Satan. But can't forget about the hatred. Opportunity comes is there for the taking. This is slave ship.
We were hustling, we were kings and queens that trying to tell us we was nothing. Black lives. Let's go, hands up. Hoods, ghettos, projects, blocks, they can't kill us all. We grind to the top. Your hustle won't die, keep pushing, don't stop, turn it up. This is for the have-nots, hoods, ghettos, projects, blocks, they can't kill us all. We grind to the top. Your hustle won't die, keep pushing, don't stop, turn it up. This is for the have-nots. This is more than music, this is my life. Everybody's scared to die, no one living right. Never stand up for less, head up, but I'm stressed. Easy to give advice if you're not being tested.
Activist Lyia has closely followed the variations in terms of people's behavior with people of color. Her perception, her observation about systematic racism against people of color is worth noticing. Take a look.
Lyia, thank you so much for being with us here on ITV Gold. I know you're joining us here from New York City. I hope you're doing well and staying well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I have you here to discuss a lot on what's happening in today's social climate, especially since the untimely and very sad death of George Floyd and the outrage that we have seen across the nation as well as in many parts of the world. You know, today I have you here to discuss how that relates to the South Asian community and the issues that we face in terms of anti-Blackness or racism and a lot more. So just beginning this interview with you, Lyia, could you explain what anti-Blackness is? And when we're looking at the South Asian community, how is this impacting us? And how is it sort of, not helping the cause, perhaps, of Black Lives Matter?
Great. So, I want to start at the very beginning, and that is, let's define what anti-Blackness is. I recently read this wonderful New York Times article, and the authors so very powerfully put it, and anti-Blackness in a sentence is the inability to recognize Black humanity. And to break it down even further, it means it's the inability within us to see Black people as humans. So when we see the murder of George Floyd, where a white police officer thought nothing of keeping his neck and using his body weight to suffocate a Black man for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we're seeing a glaring example of anti-Blackness because he didn't see George Floyd's humanity in that moment. He just saw a Black man. And to him, that didn't equate as a human. So if I were to give you a more academic definition, I'd like to quote a Malayali American professor, Professor Thomas George, who says that anti-Blackness is both the covert and overt, also the institutional and interpersonal racism that negatively affects the health, the wealth, and the safety of African Americans. What this really means is that African Americans consistently in this country, they are not safe. They cannot garner wealth like we can. They cannot ensure their health the same way we can. They're already born into this country facing unequal odds. And I say this all to say is that it's so deeply ingrained within us as a country, this anti-Blackness. It's within our systems. Just to read a few stats, 90% of the wealth in this country is concentrated with white people. The income gap between a Black household and a white household is roughly the same today as it was in 1970. So when we look at history, in 1965 is when the Civil Rights Act, 1964 is when the Civil Rights Act passed. And that's when African American people were finally given equal rights in this country. But when we look at the whole of history, for 250 years, African American people were enslaved in this country. And then for 100 years after that, when they were emancipated from slavery, they were then faced with Jim Crow laws, which led to segregation. And then it was only in 1965 that they even got full equal rights and the ability to vote. So when we look at all of that, in the entire history of this country, Black people really have only had equal rights, and I put that in quote because, as we know, they don't get to enjoy those equal rights to the same extent as others in our society for about 56 years. That's a very short time frame, right? So there's a lot of work to be done to sort of dismantle anti-Blackness in our country and in our institution. You know, when you look at the stats, just maternal mortality rates in this country, Black mothers are 3.5 times more likely to die during childbirth than white mothers. There's about 13% of the American population is African American men, but they make up 40% of our prison population. There's mass incarceration, there's, unhealthy standards that they're all facing. And it is part of the institution, and it's very difficult for us to sort of confront it, but we have to, especially the South Asian community. What, we fail to recognize is our own history in this country. Most South Asian Americans came to this country in 1965 or post-1965, all due to one piece of legislation, which was the Immigration Act of 1965. My family was a direct beneficiary of this law. A lot of families can trace back their beginnings in this country to this law, and it was specifically passed to allow highly educated or highly skilled South Asian Americans into this country. And it was only allowed because of the civil rights movement. What a lot of people don't even know is that South Asians have been in America since the 1800s. There's been documented Punjabi immigrants, traders, people that came in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And in the 1920s, the American population was really, really troubled by the presence of South Asians in their country. It was so troubled to the point that it passed the Immigration Act of 1917, which, and I would like to quote it verbatim, said that Indians and those of Indian descent were deemed undesirable to achieve American citizenship. Wow. It was a piece of legislation in this country, which you can look up on any, forum. But that is, in and of itself, shows that we weren't wanted here. We weren't wanted here until we served a purpose. And that's what the Immigration Act of 1965 did. It gave us a purpose. So it brought over highly skilled engineers, highly skilled doctors. My mom came because of the nursing shortage that this country experienced during the 70s, 80s, as did my husband's aunt, and by them coming and then chain migration, they were able to bring their families over. It was all designed, right? It was especially designed. But when we came here in 1965, we came here being able to exercise our full rights. We never experienced segregation. You and I both didn't. Our parents didn't. They don't know what that's like. And the only reason that they didn't is because Black people took it upon themselves to do that fight and get equality for all people of color, not just themselves. So we have a huge duty and obligation as a community to support African American people and to understand their plight. Our country was colonized by the British for 200 years. We were looted. Our resources were taken. I mean, tea was taken from us. Pepper, textiles, a lot of things were taken from us from the British. So we should understand more acutely how it feels for an African American who came to this country not by choice. Right. They were brought here as slaves. Their ancestors were brought here against their will. They were torn away from their homes. We know what it's like to live in our motherland as second-class citizens. My grandparents remember what that was like. Our great-grandparents, most of our grandparents can tell us about British Raj, and they know how terrible it was. So we have a history of understanding, oppression, and it is our job to, fight for that.
And now time for our weekly segment, this week with Padma Shri Dr. Sudhir Parikh. Doctor, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The way things are moving, if we go to India first in terms of the number of increased COVID-19 affected patients, how do you see what we can expect in next 1-2 weeks as far as India is concerned?
Well, as far as India is concerned, the worst has to come. Peak is 2-3 weeks away, so much more cases will be there, and that is little concerned because that will overwhelm even now they are overwhelmed the hospitals in Mumbai and in Delhi and Ahmedabad and all the big cities. So I think it is going to be a big challenge for government of India.
Talking about this challenge and bringing in some details, yesterday there was a report on major Indian news network showing Delhi hospital, government hospital, no doctor, no nurse, nobody, patients lying with dead bodies. It was very horrifying sight. Now, having mentioned that, what would you be your recommendation to Delhi government or to Health Minister of India?
Because this is bound to happen when hospital staff gets overwhelmed and hospital beds are capacity is overwhelmed. That's why I think, in spite of some expert opinion or advice, government of India was worried about economy and they opened up everything, and which is kind of, if you look at hindsight, was kind of a mistake on part of government of India. And I'm afraid that probably the prediction is that it will be a double or triple the number what we have now. So in next 2 to 3 weeks, and I don't think India has that much hospital capacity, and private hospitals are not opening up themselves. So government has to make mandatory to private hospital to take those patients. Otherwise, as you say, that patients are there in the emergency room and there's nobody to take care of them.
So we were initially probably premature in kind of looking at it with hope that the railway wagons were converted into sort of an emergency ward, etc. So all that preparation, we don't see that on the ground right now.
Right. Yeah, that preparation is not there, and manpower is not there, unfortunately. There are not many doctors or healthcare workers are there. And you will be seeing that it's going to be worse than that, So this is a big challenge, and I think whole idea of lockdown is to get prepared for this kind of eventuality, and that's why depending upon how bad the infectivity is, that because even some people, some authority in India saying that there is no community transmission, but that's not true. There is community transmission. Otherwise, you cannot have this kind of cases, right? And in India, still the amount of number of testing is very less. So still there is a lot of infected people walking around there. So I think right now what government can do is government has to open up the stadium and sports stadium and all those things and make makeshift hospitals there. Then this can be happen, and they have to recruit even medical students and nurses, those who are training to take care of this patient. Because otherwise, just like here, when we had a height of the COVID time in New Jersey, they gave special temporary license to all the doctors, those who who has not passed even a CFMG exam to take care of these patients in COVID hospitals. So I think I'm afraid that I hope it doesn't happen that much, but I'm afraid that it can happen there.
So far, it looks like
It's a grim situation right now. Grim situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you mentioned, we hope, but then again, there are many people who are out of India, they want to go back. And that situation also would become more complicated now with this uprise.
Yes. And I think because of this situation in India right now, because of the spike of all these cases, probably international flight will not open up soon. Because if they open up, then there will be more disaster. So I think it's a kind of catch-22 here, unfortunately.
Dr. Talking about New York, things are improving. And yesterday, Governor inaugurated a part of the newly built LaGuardia Airport, which is built with public and government partnership. But in terms of revival of economy, how do you see all these measures are likely to help?
I think good news for USA or New York, New Jersey or USA is that, 2 weeks ago, unemployment number was 3 million. Now yesterday's number is only 1.2 million. So that shows that those unemployed were temporarily unemployed. And you will be seeing that in July probably much less. So because I think economy is very well and alive and kicking, thanks to probably Trump administration by giving all those money to all the small business people to continue their staff, and their employee, part-time or full-time, and that helps this economy much more. And I think by having this new airport or the similar infrastructure development always generates a lot of jobs, and that will help to help drive the economy further.
Absolutely, and in the same token, the work for MTA is also now taken up in full swing, which would generate more employment. Staying with America, as compared to many other states, New York, New Jersey are in a better position, though reopening process has started in these states also. How do you see this working out in terms of transport and travel here in New York itself?
I think it's working out very good because transport is started. The public transportation has started. They are make sure that it remains clean. And overnight they have curfew for 4 or 5 hours. That's the time when they really completely overhaul the cleaning of all the subways. And again, they are following the social distance in the subway and public transportation. So I think it will work out good, because I think but it all again depends upon the response. I mean, each and every individual who has to follow. I mean, be responsible and follow their own responsibilities.
So now talking about the disturbing side, or rather that which is sort of a threat, back to India with what happened recently in Kashmir, again terror attacks, again innocent people getting killed, but many terrorists were also neutralized. Do you see there is some overlap space in terms of COVID-19 and increase of these terror activities in the valley?
Yes, there is some overlap, because always in the if you look at history or any history of any country, wherever there is this kind of disaster, always a bad element, they always take, or other our enemies, they always take advantage of this kind of situation where the government is busy with the one pandemic, and they are not trying to infiltrate and trying to create the problem. So it's not unusual, but government has much more challenges in their hand.
Absolutely. And just staying with the Valley situation and the killing of Ajay Pandita, and that's very unfortunate. Recently in India, some intellectuals as well as in media, there was a lot of support expressed for George Floyd, the unfortunate event of killing that happened on 25th June here in America, but not that many voices in support or expressing shock or grief for this. So now this is being treated as a sort of a partial way of expressing one's sympathy. Do you see that affecting India's what we want to have a sort of a communal harmony, a sort of spectrum?
Well, I mean, whatever happened in the Kashmir, of course, we have to support the government. We have to make sure that we must make a kind of a note of it and sympathy for those who are a victim of those kind of terrorist attack or terrorist activities. At the same time, probably you may show some more support for this George thing, what happened in USA, in India, because I think it's a basic issue where the people want that racism of any kind should not be there. I mean, here we have a white and black thing, and in India we have caste system, and that caste system is also a kind of racism, and that should not be like that. For example, somebody who killed a cow got 10 years in prison. I think I'm not sure, or personally, that that kind of punishment for cow killing for 10 years and for human being killing, no punishment or not even arrest. I think that creates again in long term more disharmony in the country than harmony.
So again, there are multiple cases, and each case has its own unique ways.
Hello?
Getting into the details of that, coming back to America, and just little time that we have seen the uprise of this Black Lives Matter movement, resulting into a breaking of some of the historical statues, including Columbus statue, etc. So, how do you see this trend? Because they consider them to be representing something which they want to object to.
Yeah, that is deplorable. I mean, breaking the statue or removing the statue, all those is deplorable, and it should not happen because that has nothing to do with the basic cause or movement what we are fighting for. Our movement is to reform in the police system or police training or police how the police department function. That should be reformed, not breaking the statue or those things. It doesn't take us anywhere. So I completely deplore those kind of things, and there should be the peaceful protest, and make sure that they influence the lawmaker to change or reform the police department so this kind of racial incidents doesn't happen.
Absolutely, and as we conclude, again, as always, we talk about the precautions needed to be observed while we go back to work and the process of reopening. Your tips on that, as well as your final words from today's show.
Okay, dear friends, now we are reopening everywhere, including New York and New Jersey. So be very careful, be alert, be safe, and be smart. And keep the distance, social distance, wear the mask in the public, and keep washing your hands and personal hygiene. Keep the personal hygiene up. And if you do that, then you can beat the COVID or any other future COVID spike. Thank you. God bless America. God bless India. And see you next time. Goodbye.
While we are ready to wind up today's Vision of Asia, time to recollect. We have a very vibrant ITV Gold Facebook page, and be friends with us there. Do subscribe ITV Gold's YouTube channel and keep writing to us, events@itvgold.com. Thank you very much for supporting us, for being a part of Vision of Asia, ITV Gold. Stay safe, stay healthy, take care. This is Ashok Vyas. Namaste.